Hi, I'm Attentive Dragon, and welcome to my Let's Play series dedicated to Kerbal Space Program. Kerbal for beginners by beginners. Now, I guess I should give a bit of a disclaimer here. I'm not a complete beginner when it comes to Kerbal Space Program. I have played around a bit with the science mode and the sandbox mode, but even with what I've done before, I'm still having trouble doing basic things like making orbital rendezvous consistently or getting to other planets. The most I've been able to get to is to the moons of Kerbin. So I thought it might be a good idea to do a let's play where I will try to learn the game, to play the game better, and you all can learn with me. We can all learn together. I have never played the career mode of Kerbal Space Program, although I have watched several really excellent playthroughs by other YouTubers like Scott Manley, who've done a great job demonstrating how to play the game. But I figured let's do a playthrough by someone who's never done it, and we'll figure it out together as we go. So let's get started. We're going to click on Start Game here, and once this comes up, we will start a new game. We are selecting a career mode, and we're going to call it Attentive. Here we go. Now, the first thing that's going to pop up is the Kerbal Space Center. I do want to point out that I'm not using any mods in this playthrough, except for the Kerbal Alarm Clock. I'm not going to use any of the really helpful mods like Kerbal Engineer or any of the other really awesome mods that really help you to do a lot of the... they do a lot of the work for you, not so much in doing all the work, but they help you find out a lot of useful information, like you're doing a lot of the rocketry, mathematics for you, figuring out your delta V and such. I will go ahead and leave the alarm clock on because it doesn't really affect anything. We may end up using it, but probably not. When we first pop in here, we have Gene Kerman, who introduces us to his space center. He's the flight director, and he just lets us know that we can right-click on any building to learn more about it, or left-click to enter it. As you can see, I can right-click on any of these buildings here. We will have the opportunity later to upgrade them once we have enough money. One thing we should know, we have 25,000 units of money, and our reputation is fairly neutral. So we're going to have to do a good job to get a better reputation, to get more money, and to get more science points. Science points are part of the currency of this game, which will get spent in the Research and Development Lab. As you can see at the very beginning of the game, we have only these basic available parts. As we gain more science, we can spend it on these later categories, which will open up more and more parts for us as we go along. But for now, these are just a dream of the future. All we have is this basic stuff to begin with, but hey, that's enough to start off with. So let's exit out of here. I'm going to move the alarm clock kind of out of the way here. Other than the Research and Development Lab, we also have places like the Administration Building. Here we can go ahead and allocate some of our funds or science points that we get into be used into other categories if we want to go ahead and, for example, fundraising campaign. The reputation that we gain, 5% of that will go towards funds or patents licensing. We can get the science that we pull in will yield funds for each unit of science. It can also take science and, for example, in the outsourced R&D, actually let me find a good one here. Yeah, here in the unpaid research program, it can take the reputation and put it right into science. So we can go ahead and do different things to play around with these numbers. If we're having trouble getting more money, well, we can start using up some of our science that we might have an excess of or such. Either way, we're going to go ahead and not do any of those right now. We also have the astronaut complex where we can recruit our astronauts. Currently, we start off with 4. Jebediah Kerman, who's a pilot. Bill Kerman, who's an engineer. Bob Kerman, who's a scientist. And Valentina Kerman, who's also a pilot. If we need more Kerbals, or if some of these ones unfortunately die off, hopefully they won't, we can always recruit from this pool of hopeful applicants. We also have here the vehicle assembly building and the space plane hangar. We'll go to those in a moment. This is where we assemble our different types of vehicles that'll be going off into space. Here's mission control. We'll come back to that in just a moment. The tracking station allows us to track the vehicles that we've put into orbit. This is the planet Kerman. the planet Kerbin. As you can see, there's the moon. And, well, any objects that we have orbiting will be showing up here in the Tracked Objects section, and we can go ahead and view them or go ahead and visit them. There's also the launch pad, which is where we'll be visiting that soon again. We'll be launching our vehicles from there. Let's go ahead and visit Mission Control, and we'll go ahead and select some missions. Gene Kerman has a couple available for us. Currently, because this building has not been upgraded, we can have a maximum of 2 missions. Let's go ahead and gather scientific data from Kerbin. That basically means that we're going to go ahead and do a crew report before launching. That will go ahead and give us this contract, which will give us some money, as well as a point of science and reputation. We'll also go ahead and launch our very first vessel. Since the space program has never launched before, this is a pretty big day for them. We'd officially like to start the space program off with a bang. A very controlled bang, preferably. That'll also give us some money, science, and reputation. Well, that's two contracts. That's all we can hold, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and start off in the vehicle assembly building, because that's where we're going to build our rockets. There's Werner von Kerman. He's in charge of the vehicle assembly building. He's the chief rocketry engineer, and, well, he's here to tell us to build a rocket. Now, in Kerbal Space Program, every rocket, to begin with, has to have some sort of control core. That can either be a command capsule holding an astronaut, or some sort of computer core if it's an unmanned probe. To begin with, though, again, remember, we start off with some limited parts. We haven't yet developed all that technology. Our very first part, all we have is a Mark I command pod that can hold 1 astronaut. So we'll go ahead and select that. We have to do that before we can build anything else. We have to have a pod to begin with. Now, for those of you who have never played the game, the right mouse button moves around, left to right, up and down. Change your camera angle. Left mouse button selects items, moves them around. The scroll wheel moves you up and down, and holding down Shift while using the scroll wheel zooms you in and out. If you're using a laptop, I recommend getting some sort of external mouse. Using the trackpad kind of often doesn't let you use this kind of functionality. It makes it hard to scroll in and out and zoom in, which can sometimes make putting your rockets together hard. Later on, we're going to unlock fuel tanks. There are 2 main types of engines in the world of Kerbal Space Program. I'm oversimplifying since we're just starting off. There's liquid fuel, which uses rocket fuel and oxidizer mixed together to create a chemical reaction, and they go out of a liquid fuel engine, and that will those types of engines can be started and stopped, and they'll go until they run out of fuel or until you stop them, and they can be restarted after they've fired once. The other type is what's called a solid fuel booster. This is similar to the boosters used by the space shuttle in real life. They are full of what's called solid fuel. Once they are launched, they will ignite, fire, and they will burn until they are done. You cannot turn it off and you cannot turn it back on. It just burns until it's done burning. Now, since we don't have any liquid fuel tanks, this is the only engine we have. It's a solid fuel booster. It's a solid fuel tank attached to a rocket. We're going to go ahead and put it onto our ship. And that right there is a rocket. It'll go up. The problem is when it comes down, it's going to come down just as fast. So let's see if we have any way to save our little Kerbals. Here's a basic fin. If we want, we can put that onto the craft to go ahead and give us a little more stability. Now, if you notice, I could put 1 fin there, but if I want to put more than 1 fin, while it's selected, I can hold down the X button, and I can put 3 or 4 of them, or even more. Down here on the left here, you see this here? The symmetry count? This tells you how many you're putting in. I can do 1 or more by hitting the X button. Holding down Shift and hitting X does the opposite and reduces the count. Now, of course, the problem is the more I put in, the more it's going to cost us. So let's go ahead and take it off completely for now. I don't think we need it for just this first launch. Under Utility, we have a Mark 16 parachute. That'll let us get home safely. We'll put that on top of the capsule. Now, one thing you might want to note, Let's go ahead and take this parachute off for a moment. Do you notice the little green ball that was right here a moment ago? When I select this, you'll see the green ball appear at the top of the command capsule. That's where I can attach an item. Currently, we could put this on the bottom. If I flipped it over, that wouldn't do us much good, though. That would be in the way of my engine. So let's put it on the top. Now, to flip it over as I did, you can use the A, S, D, and W keys. Those are the traditional up, down, left, and right keys in most first-person shooters to flip items around in different directions. Or you can rotate them using using the Q and the E keys. Pretty handy. All right. The only other items that were here right now were a mystery goo containment unit that allows us to do scientific experiments on mystery goo. We can take that with us on trips, as well as this modular girder segment. We can use that on some later rockets. Doesn't really come in handy right now, and it seems like it would just be a waste of money to add it on. Okay, so this seems like a fairly complete rocket. It has an engine which will let us go. It has a parachute that'll let us come home safely, and it has a place for our crew member to sit. So let's go ahead. We'll type in the name of this craft up top, Kerbal 1, and we will save it. And let's launch it and see what happens. Our launch pad isn't very impressive yet. This is how it starts off. We don't have any of the fancy gantries or anything else to begin with. Jebediah Kerman will be our pilot today. He's ready to go, a little nervous, but more excited. Now, to go ahead and begin launch, we go ahead and hit the space bar. But there's one thing I want to point out, which actually I forgot to do in the vehicle assembly building. Look over here on the left side of the screen where this 0 is, this little orange section. This is our staging, and what'll happen is, once I press spacebar, the very first stage will go. This engine will fire, and the parachute will open at the same time. That's not particularly useful. That could be disastrous. What you have to do is, before you launch your rockets, and we should have done this in the vehicle assembly building, but we'll do it now. Let's go ahead and add an additional stage, and we will move the engine to the beginning. We want the engine to fire first, and then we want the parachute to go later when we hit space again. That should save us any problems. The other thing you might want to do before launching, if we had a liquid fuel engine, is, if you look here, this is our throttle on the left side of this nav ball. This is the nav ball here. The Z key gives us full throttle. The X key cuts throttle entirely. Shift can gradually raise it up, and Control can do the same in the opposite direction. Now, this is a solid fuel booster. It doesn't really matter how much throttle we give it. It's just going to burn at full strength once I start it until it's out of fuel. Then it's going to cut off completely. But for future reference, that's what the throttle is for. When we are using liquid engines with liquid fuel tanks with engines that can support this sort of thing, we can throttle them up or down to change the level of thrust. On the right side, this is our G-forces. This is the amount of G-force that our brave astronaut is undergoing during the launch. And here, this is the nav ball. This will tell us the direction we are facing. Currently, we are pointing straight up. 90 degrees here will be to the east, 270 to the west. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and launch by hitting spacebar in 3, 2... Oh, we forgot one thing. One of our contracts asked for us to do a crew report. So we're right-clicking on the command capsule and doing a crew report. Jebediah Kerman will look out. He records the crew's assessment of the situation, and we'll go ahead and keep that experiment. All right, let's go ahead and launch. 3, 2, 1, spacebar. And we're lifting off, climbing into the sky higher and higher. 300 meters. Here next to our engine, you can see the amount of fuel we have left. We can also view that by going over here to our Resources tab. If we click on it, it will stay up even when I move the mouse off of it. Our solid fuel is quickly depleting. We're already at 1,500 meters and climbing. And our engine is empty. We are now free falling. Well, free flying, as it were. Still climbing. We're now at 4,000 meters. This gauge here shows us that we are climbing. We are now climbing at this rate. As we end our climb, this needle will go down to 0 and then move down into here as we begin falling. This shows us our acceleration in the up or down direction. This gauge here below our atmosphere, below our altitude, is showing how far up in the atmosphere we are, how thin the air is becoming. As you can see, all the way to the left would be space. And we're at 8,500. Here above our nav ball, you can see our speed. Our speed is very rapidly decreasing. We're down to about 150 meters per second and falling. Once that hits 0, we're going to begin dropping straight down like a rock. Jebediah is enjoying himself. We'll go ahead and do an internal view. Here's Jebediah's view of the world around him. Not much of a view. These early capsules didn't really give you much of a view of the outside world. If we go ahead and hit the C key, it'll take us back outside. And we are at 20 meters per second, 15, 10, 5, and we are now falling back to the surface, rapidly gaining speed. Now over here we have the contracts tab. If you look at this, you can see that we have achieved the goal of launching our first vessel. The gather scientific data from Kerbal requirement is still pending. We've gone ahead and gathered it, but we haven't safely returned it to home yet. So we need to go ahead and we'll go ahead and hopefully get back safely. Let's go ahead and I was going to open our parachute, but I was going to wait a little longer until we get a little closer to the surface. Now these parachutes are safe to open once they've when you're re-entering the atmosphere, I should say. If you're traveling too fast or coming in too hot, those parachutes are not safe to open. They will get destroyed. But if you're once your speed reduces enough, the atmosphere will slow you down. As we get lower and lower, our speed should slow down. We're not going to continue increasing in speed forever. There is what's called terminal velocity. An object can only go so fast once it's in the atmosphere. It will reach a certain terminal velocity and stop there. It should be safe to open our parachute once that happens. We'll hopefully stop accelerating. I mean, currently we're continuing to accelerate. We're at 250 meters per second and continuing to accelerate. I'm hoping to open up our parachute at about 1,000 meters. I think that'll be safe. As you can see, our speed is still increasing, but not quite as quickly. All right, we're about 2,000 meters. Sorry, 2,500, I should say. Coming in hot. We're at 2,000. Let's go ahead and open up our parachute at 1,500. Now, our parachute's deploying behind us. Hopefully it unfurls. Our surface speed is decreasing quickly, down to about 10 meters per second. And it stabilizes at about 6.5 meters per second for a gentle touchdown. Congratulations, Jebediah Kerbal. You are the first Kerbal to ever launch off of a rocket ship. Now that we've landed, we can go ahead and click Recover Vessel. And it gives us a mission summary. We gathered 5 data for our crew report. as well as one for our recovery of the vessel that survived a flight. That gave us 1.5 science plus 5 science. That we earned 6.5 science for that, giving us a total of 14. We got all these parts back, so we got some money back, even though we spent money to build it. We got money back for returning these items. And we safely recovered our crew member, who gained some experience. So let's go ahead and go to the mission control. And as you can see, we completed these 2 contracts. Gathering scientific data and launching our first vessel. Both were successes. And we now have 108,107 funds. It's a pretty good start. So let's go ahead and do one more mission before we end our first video here. Now, some of these contract missions are going to be things like going to a specific location, doing what's called a focused survey of Kerbal. They'll want us to do a report in flight above a certain place. That's kind of hard when you're in a rocket ship. Those are useful a little later when we maybe build some airplanes. However, there's other things like this where they want us to test out a piece of equipment such as this LV T-45 swivel liquid fuel engine into flight above Kerbal. This mission requires that we get to 42,000 meters and then test it out. We can test out the Mark 16 parachute while in flight. As long as we're above 3,000 meters, that will give us a contract. Well, let's go ahead and do that one. I'm not going to do the swivel one just yet because we're not quite ready to get that high. We only got to about 10,000 meters. Now we can also test this stack decoupler while landed at Kerbal. Let's go ahead and test this item as well. And let's build ourselves a rocket and try those things out. So here's our Kerbal 1. We should be able to use the same rocket to do this mission. Now, one of the things it wants us to test out is the Mark 16 parachute. Well, we already have one of those, and we saw that it worked great, but we'll go ahead and test it again. However, they also want us to test this stack decoupler, but they want us to test it while landed at Kerbal. Let me show you what stack decouplers normally do. Now, normally, while you're in flight, once your engine's done, you may be familiar with this from seeing footage of the Apollo missions or other space flights. After the engines are done burning, the rocket stages. A decoupler fires, and this lower stage, boom, is blown away and falls back to Earth. That's what this is for. This is called a decoupler. Now, we could go ahead and do this, but it would separate and we wouldn't be able to launch. Or if we did it while we were up in the air, it wouldn't be fulfilling the requirements of our contract, which said to do it on the ground while landed. So let's go ahead. I'm going to be a little tricky here. We'll go ahead and set up our rocket just like it was before. We'll put this stack decoupler at the bottom and have it be the first thing that happens. We'll go ahead and decouple it from the beginning. Then we'll fire our engines. And then lastly, we will deploy our parachute. Our staging seems to be set up properly here. Not sure if this is actually going to work the way I hope it is, but let's try it out. Let's save our rocket and go to launch. Jebediah is ready once again to launch the second attempt at rocketry, testing out the new decoupler. Now, unfortunately, this contract did say, use the decoupler while landed. So our first press of the spacebar will fire this first stage, which is the decoupling. Test complete and successful. Our second stage will be our engine. Launch. And off we go. Our fuel is rapidly decreasing. Now, about this time, I'm going to show you something helpful. If you have a pilot piloting your craft, one who has enough skills, you can use what's called the T key to allow you to do sort of an autopilot. In this case, we have what's available is called stability assist. That just basically says, hold my rocket at the heading that it's at. Don't spin left or right or in any other directions. Oh, let me show you something really quickly. Look at my parachute. See how it's red here on the left here? That means that it is not safe to deploy. We are moving too fast for that parachute to deploy safely. If I tried to open the parachute now, that parachute would get ripped to shreds. Now you see we've dropped our speed enough that the parachute has turned white. As I was saying, when I hit the T key, I'll go ahead and hit it again. Here where my mouse is moving, you'll see this will light up. It's called SAS. This here, the stability assist, is activated. The ship will now go straight as far as Jebediah can help it. Now, as he levels up, as Jebediah gets better and more experienced, more things will become available. Jebediah will gain the ability to automatically point at different directions, such as prograde, retrograde, and such. Prograde, if you can see on my, I'm going to go ahead and move my ship a little bit, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. Do you see this little marker here, this little yellow design? That's called prograde. That basically, all that means is the direction we're moving. In fact, if I flip my ship over, we're still moving upwards, well, but this is retrograde. We're pointing in the opposite direction. We're pointing backwards, retrograde. Although that's now moving because we're about to switch directions. Notice we're about to slow down to 0 and start falling again. And there we go, we're now falling. There are other directions, normal, anti-normal, radial, and anti-radial, which aren't really important just yet. Those are more important once we finally get into orbit. As Jebediah gets more skill in piloting, he will be able to automatically point prograde, retrograde, radial, anti-radial, and so on. But for now, he can hold the ship pretty steady. He's pretty good at that. Let's go ahead and turn off stability assist for now. Now, my ship, as you can see, is tending to fall nose down, but let me show you how I went ahead and steered it. Do you remember those WASD keys that I used to flip the part over earlier? Well, I'm using them now. WASD allow you to move the ship left, right, up, and down. They help us to maneuver. And remember the Q and E that let us rotate the parts? Same thing, they can spin our ship in one direction or the other. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up the parachute now so I can show you one last thing. I'm just waiting one moment for our chute to fully open. While that happens, what I wanted to show you was there is a one last command in this game that allows us to speed up time. We still have 4,000 meters to fall, and that's going to take us a while. The plus and minus, sorry, I meant to say the right bracket and left bracket, also the period and comma keys, allow us to speed up time. As you can see, I'm warping up to 4 times speed, and it also allows me to go back to 1 time speed. That makes it easier to get through slow, boring parts of the game, like falling from 4,000 meters in the sky. And there goes our parachute opening fully, slowing us down to a comfortable 6 meters per second. And now, as you can see, it's going to take us a little bit of time for our craft to fall all the way down to the bottom. So let's go ahead and speed up time again. We'll go ahead and time warp to 4 times speed. That's the maximum that we can do while we're still within Kerbin's atmosphere. We'll get to about 100 meters or so. And let's go ahead and go back to 1 time speed. As we come in for a landing, you can see our shadow on the ground is getting closer, and we're about to hit the ground. And we've returned safely, having completed 2 contracts. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and recover our vessel. We gained a little bit more science, bringing us up to 20 total. That might be enough for us to start researching some new parts. We recovered all these parts, got a little bit of money back. And because of those contracts and what we did, we now have 155,000 funds. Our reputation has also gone up slightly. We now have a total reputation of 26. That's pretty exciting. That's a pretty good start to, I think, to our series. I'm going to go ahead and end this first video at this point. In future episodes, I hope to go ahead and get into orbit, and I'll try to teach a little bit about how orbit works in the game of Kerbal Space Program and in real life, how we go ahead and get to other planets and such. But that will be for future episodes. So until next time, I leave you with the motto of brave Kerbals everywhere, per aspera ad astra. Through adversity to the stars.